All right, Rosalind, I'm going to kick things over to you just to give a brief intro of yourself and then we'll dive in.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Savannah. And super happy to be here. Super happy to talk about our super relevant topic. Also, as we all try to kind of do more with less, or as someone mentioned to me yesterday, maybe a better saying is do better with less. So excited to be here. I'm Rosalind Santa Elena. I'm currently the founder. I actually started my own business around the RevOps Collective, but have been a go-to-market and RevOps leader now for the past couple of decades. So super passionate about revenue operations, and obviously one of our charters is to help our team be more efficient, more effective, and do better with less. So excited to be here. I'm going to kick it over to Jordan. Jordan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate Rosalind do better with less. I think I'm going to start taking and token that as well. Great to see everybody jumping on as well. My name is Jordan Heisel, formerly based in Denver and new to the Indianapolis area. So I saw some other Midwest folks joining the call, which was really exciting to see. I've been in the SaaS arena for the past 7 or 8 years, primarily in sales, but also did a little bit in marketing, and now am an RVP of sales in the commercial space here at Conga. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to Jeff Ford.
Hey, thank you, Jordan. Happy to be here with all of you. My name is Jeff Ford. I'm a Senior Vice President of Global Revenue Operations at Conga as well. I am currently on from Denver, Colorado, where we had a lot of snow last night. So some new weather for me because I'm officially from Scottsdale, Arizona. So had some new weather. Thrilled to be here. Germane topic, particularly in today's economy, and can't wait to get going.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm in the Bay Area, California. So I think it's really cold today, but I'm quite spoiled. I think it's about 65. So cannot complain. But excited to be here. So, obviously we're talking about super, super relevant topic, right? Looking at the current, really looking at the current landscape of today. And I think everyone is trying to figure out, how do I dive deep and really figure out how to be more effective and more efficient, and a lot of times with less resources as the market starts to slow down. So definitely a very relevant topic for today. I'd love to know sort of where everybody maybe in the audience is, if they can add to the chat, just kind of what are some of the things that you're seeing in the market and how are you all thinking about things for next year? But in the meantime, let's dive into our first topic around top line metrics, right? So everyone wants to focus on the right metrics, the metrics that matter. What are some of those things that really affect how you convert? Because it's all about conversion. So maybe Jeff, we can start with you. As a sales leader, how are you planning to do more or do better with less going into this season?
Yeah. So I think, the elephant in the room for everybody when we talk about this being a particularly relevant topic is that, look, I think everybody across almost every industry is facing, or at least predicting that they're going to be facing, a certain amount of macroeconomic headwinds. And so the idea, and many companies are unfortunately, cutting people and trying to focus on producing more with fewer resources. And so I guess the main topic is how you do that in terms of some of the metrics I play. And again, I'm a revenue operations leader, so I think that means I wear multiple hats, right? So one of the hats I lead, I feel is sort of being a sales leader. I certainly engage in with a lot of customers. Conga is a revenue operations platform, and I ultimately run revenue operations, so I tend to be pretty customer facing in my role. So I certainly have a mind, and my past was a sales leader. I also really am responsible for helping the company measure things and reduced friction from our sales process. So at the end of the day, I think to answer your question, sales is, and I'll talk about this at the highest level, sales is a simple business, right? Are you generating enough pipeline? And that would, given what your historical close rates are on that pipeline. I think, Rosalind, you said conversion is everything, and I tend to agree with that. So pipeline creation is the first metric. What is my conversion rate of that is the second metric. And I always think that there's sort of 2 to 3 controllable things that we can actually control for in sales. The result of pipeline creation and conversion rate is ultimately sales or bookings, right? And it's really as simple as that. I might throw in deal size as a possible third metric. Sometimes that's controllable, sometimes it's not. It often has to do with enablement and how we think about telling a bigger story about what we do so that we can get customers to buy more of what it is that we're selling. And so 2 to 3 kind of controllable metrics. I tend to think in the short term, and I think that there are some things you can do here, so slight caveat, but I tend to think that a strategy around close rate improvement is almost always a failed strategy. I think that it is a hard strategy to execute in the short term. And so I think if you then look at, you've got two real controllable metrics for pipeline creation and conversion rate. Well, I think the biggest one that we can really focus on and control is pipeline conversion, or pipeline creation rather. And so I guess the key question is, in an environment where you have fewer resources and you're trying to do better or more with less, how? Right? So how can you create more pipeline, get more at bats, particularly in a macroeconomic environment where we'd actually project that close rates or conversion rates might actually be dropping. So you'll have to generate more pipeline to offset that potential drop in conversion or close rates. And I think that the key answer to that is you have to give more time to your sellers. I don't know many sales organizations in my role that the sellers are just sitting around and go, well, I'm not super busy, and I wish that there would just be more inbound leads. We embrace a concept at Conga in our sales atmosphere that everybody's a prospector. And often I think the biggest constraint that we have in terms of everybody being a prospector is time, and this giving the salespeople back the time to be able to execute. So how do you give the salespeople more time? I think that the first thing is making sure that they have a robust tool set that they can use that can help them go to market efficiently or effectively. We rolled out a tool, and I'm not ashamed to plug a few other companies on here. We rolled out a tool called Sixth Sense, and it really helps us understand where intent market signals are, or intent market signals are coming to our sales team, and it helps us understand which accounts to go after. Often, I think that's the biggest waste of time, is that sales reps go, well, hey, it depends on what segment you're in. Jordan is a good source here because she runs a sales team that has many accounts. And so where to kind of point the arrow and make sure that the time that you're spending is efficient, I think is really important to getting time back. And so we use a tool here that helps us know where to go point the arrow, and I think that's important. We also have used SalesLoft and Outreach for sales cadence development, and I think that's really important. Lots of data in the industry says, hey, it takes hitting a customer 8, 10, 12 times for them to pay attention to you. And so being able to automate that, make sure that A, you're completing that cycle, and B, that it gives you time back to be able to generate more pipeline and focus on more customers in the marketplace. And then the last thing I would say is processes. It's really important that you have not only the right tools, but you have the right processes in your company. And that would be everything from helping to automate quoting. This is a topic that we spend a lot of time on with customers. How long does it take you to generate a quote? And often the answer is, it takes me 2 days, it takes me 5 days, it takes me a week, it takes me 2 weeks. And you sort of see that the biggest inefficiency is sort of in that mid range, where companies have grown up enough to have lots and lots of processes and lots of check-ins and rules and processes and things they have to follow, but they're all manual. And they require lots of people signing off on things, and that takes a lot of time. So automating things like quoting, automating things like contracting, and making sure that these are things you can do at clicks of a button rather than lots and lots of messages back and forth, also helps to give sales reps time back. That time back can be spent to generate pipeline. Hopefully we see at least a consistent close rate, but at least if we see it slightly deteriorate, you're generating more pipeline to offset that and ultimately producing the same amount of sales from it.
Yeah, Jeff, you covered a lot there, but I love the fact that you touched on process. Of course, you didn't directly say data, but you did talk about intent and information and getting the right data in front of your reps to know where to kind of, as a Canadian had shared the hockey analogy with me around, knowing, where to skate to the puck. I guess skate where the puck is going. I think that's the saying. I'm trying to drop some sayings here. We'll see if they catch on. But, that's really the key, right? So that they're spending time on the right accounts. They're focused on the ones that are most likely to convert at that point in time. And you also talked about, you talked about process, systems, and data. So I think you touched on as a true RevOps leader, the areas and enablement, right? You touched on all the buckets that I probably would have hit on as well. Jordan, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts as well. Before we go there, I just want to mention one thing about the process. You kind of talked about top of funnel and building pipeline, which I think is really important. And then also about when you're actually trying to accelerate the close cycle around the documentation, getting the paperwork done and making sure that you're providing that sort of frictionless customer experience to expedite that process, but also in the middle of the funnel. And Jordan, I'm sure you're probably going to tackle this side of the house being a sales leader, but around how do we drive momentum in the deal cycle, right? Because deals are going to slow down. They're going to stall. You're going to have less of them. So how do we really, focus in on using data process and technology to help in that area? So Jordan, would love to hear sort of your thoughts around this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll touch on the momentum piece second, but just to kind of hit off of, I think, how do you manage this from a day-to-day perspective in terms of having reps in front of you and a team that's saying, how do we have a bigger mountain to climb and how do we get there? And I think something that we do and we have done at Conga where we really make it about the rep versus making it about a number, right? We know that we have to hit a company number, but I think something that, the leaders at the organization, it's build the plan so that the reps have the ability to not only hit, but exceed their number. And it's building, what is your quota, but it's not really what is your quota, right? What is the number that you want to make and what is your goal? And then as leaders, it's holding them accountable, right? And the holding them accountable is you have to hit 3x your pipeline goal or 4x your pipeline goal, maybe in certain instances where we're looking out at the future. And then how do we do that? And I think that when you think about how you want to approach pipeline, especially in a time right now, right, you have to think about it. And I think as Jeff had mentioned, I'm more in the commercial and SMB space where we have a lot of accounts. So it's sometimes hard when you're looking at everywhere, where do I turn, right? And it's really toning in, I think, as a leader for that accountability and focusing in 3 key areas. One, if you're looking for fast turnaround, look at your existing base, look at the people that are already your fans and start focusing on, deploying sprint methodologies where you can focus in your team and really execute as a team and create that performance, but also still working your long-term strategic opportunities in your top tier 1 accounts and utilizing tools that can help you get there. And then when you think about having a culture where you want to continue that prospecting, it's really, and it sounds corny, but like creating that hunger as a team, right? And it's not from a leader or a rep, but it's a culture of, hey, we're going to win and we're going to win together. We need to drive towards this success. And it comes down from voices of understanding where those processes may be falling down, right? So how do we build a quote? Because at the end of the day, you want to keep them motivated and keep that velocity going, not only in your deals, but as you continue forward. So if they're focusing on administrative components, right, that's dragging them down, that's pulling them away from where they're going. So I think it's holding them accountable, being coachable, but also understanding, hey, listening, where are these issues that are slowing down our deals from an admin perspective that could hold us back from the winning culture that we're trying to present.
Yeah, I love that. I love that around really focusing on your customer base, right? And really hugging your customers and making sure that they're seeing value and making sure that they're seeing success as well, because they are also being affected by the downturn in the market. So I definitely love that. And it's a great opportunity, as we all know, it's much easier, right, to expand into an existing account than to go acquire net new logos, especially at this time. Mm-hmm. So I love that. So let's talk about a little bit more about deals, right? We talked about kind of moving momentum, driving some momentum in the deal cycle, trying to push things forward. But then when you actually look at the deals, everyone's cutting back, right? People are holding really tight onto their budget, or they're just not spending at all. And if they are going to spend, they're going to spend the minimal amount, right, to get the value that they need and to meet their short-term needs. So if you think about trying to, maximize your deal size, right? So now you have something in the funnel, you're working a deal, you're pushing it to close. But what are some of the things that maybe that you've seen work in terms of trying to drive larger deal size? And Jordan, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is when you're going and approaching an opportunity, you have to sell through value, right? This is a time where technology, majority of the folks, what we're looking at is we're selling technology, and technology drives efficiencies, right? Yes. So if you're understanding the value in the solution that you're offering, you have to really ensure that we're not just saying, hey, this can help do this, right? It can help solve XYZ, but understanding what is the organization driving to do today? What is it driving to do a year from now, 3 years from now? Really, what are those C-level and executive goals? And if you can start getting aligned at an executive level and help them achieve the organizational goals, right? You're going to be selling based on value. And then it's no longer a negotiation of how can I fit this in a budget, but how can I help be a part of your strategic initiatives on the long term, and really helping drive, so that helps you throughout the negotiation process, because you're not negotiating a price or a SKU, or I'm just trying to sell you this one more product to manage in your tech stack, right? But you're selling in the value. And I think back to you, Rosalind, as someone that's been in the RevOps space, and as well as Jeff, right? Like when you guys purchase technology, have you seen the difference of how that's been positioned to you? And maybe how do you guys have thought about that in times where there's been economic downturns, of when you turn to technology to help you drive efficiency?
Yeah, Jeff, maybe I'll jump in first. I think, one of the things that I always talk about tech is like, don't buy tech just to buy tech, right? It's like
Right.
everyone has that shiny new object syndrome, and they're like, oh, I have this problem, so I'm going to go buy technology, right? And I think now more than ever, we need to really, from a buyer's perspective as well, and as we enable our sellers to sell technology into their customer base, to really think about what are those value, what is that value prop that you talked about, Jordan? Sort of what are those use cases, but really isolate on, hey, what are the business problems or challenges that I'm trying to solve, right? And make sure that the technology is aligned to multiple use cases in this case, right? You don't want to just buy these kind of point solutions where you're like, okay, I solved one thing. Now I have to figure out how to integrate this tool with my other 6 tools to go do the other 6 things that I need, and to try to figure out, the best technology for that use case and for your challenges at the time. And then think about the rest of your tech stack as well, right? Around how things integrate, how well they're going to work together. And then what are the key benefits that you're going to realize short term, right? Because right now we're all thinking about short term wins and then longer term as well. Yeah. Jeff, what do you think?
I think those are great points. Look, I buy a lot of software in my role, and so I want to be careful that we don't just limit this conversation to software. But look, SaaS as a business model, I tend to buy from people who are experts in their space. And I think that now is a time that if you don't see it coming, there are some headwinds coming macroeconomically. This is the time to really double down and be an expert in your space. If you people that are just selling products, I frankly just don't have enough time in my day for them, because what I do know is buying software solves nothing ever. Buying software successfully implemented does solve business problems. And unless I'm dealing with somebody that has been there and done it and seen it and fixed it and can really truly be a resource to me, then they're selling me a product, and I'm really sort of inherently less interested in that. So be an expert in your space, really truly know what, and offer a perspective. Like, don't be willing to challenge a customer. In fact, I'll ask everybody a question. Put in the chat what the worst answer you can get in a sales cycle is. I'll give everybody just a second. And because I'm also going to go back to this idea, Mike T got it right. He put in maybe. So that is the worst answer you can get in a sales cycle. So qualify your deals. Ghosting is also not good. It's just, and also just not fun. So I think be an expert in your space, but also like we are professional sellers, right? Everybody that's on this call is here because they want to get tips about selling. And as a professional seller, realize that the person on the other end is not a professional buyer. So the way to get bigger deals is to A, be an expert in your space, but B, to execute a really solid sales process, right? Understand the pain points, help to qualify it. By the way, if you are not a fit, exit it. If the customer is not willing to buy software, don't spend your time there. Spend your time where there's a reason to spend your time, because Mike and Justin are right that the worst answer you can get is maybe. I would much rather get a no than a maybe, because at least you can go redirect your time. And of course, the best answer is yes. So working toward yes, I think that things like closing plans are incredibly important. I think when sales reps particularly are newer, it is a really scary thing to put a closing plan out there. And by the way, I'm not just suggesting something that lives on your computer. I'm suggesting something that you share with a customer. Hey, if we can solve this business problem with you, start with the most obvious question. Who would actually sign the purchase order or order form at your company? Okay, cool. Who else would be involved in the decision process? Okay, great. And then work backwards to all of the things that are going to have to be accomplished before then, and share with them and say, hey, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page, anticipating buying something around December 15th, and work backwards to all the things that have to happen. That ensures that your deal is real. And I think so often We spend time on deals that aren't real or hope are real, but we're not willing to really ask the question. And then the last thing I'll say in the realm of being a professional seller is we assume too much of our buyers, I think. And we assume that they really do know what they're buying and truly understand it and can build out the business justifications. And we assume that if we're just convincing and we talk really well on a phone call or have a great engagement, that those deals are going to close. Well, what happens on my end when I'm buying software is I'm doing all sorts of business justifications, and you'd be surprised how seldom the companies I'm buying from offer help in that process. Like, hey, have you thought through how to put together a business analysis, an ROI return for your company? What are the total
Mhm.
services and software spend? Like, start assuming the close. Like, what does this look like to implement? What is the total software or product and services? What does that overall look like? And by the way, Rosalind, if I was selling to you, what benefit does that offer your organization? And can I help in that? Right? Can I
Mhm.
help you deliver a compelling business case internally? Because I'm an expert in this space. And so it ties back to that first point. I'm an expert in this space, and I'm happy. I've seen this over and over and over again, and I'm happy to help you through this buying cycle to make sure that we come out with a good outcome.
Yeah, I love that because I think you mentioned, some of the different areas, but also helping them get through the legal process, helping them get through the
Mhm.
security process, right? Exactly that kind of lending the expertise that, that your prospect or your potential customer is going to need to navigate their own internal processes. Jordan, anything else
What
that you would add?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I think closing plans you hit the nail on the head, Jeff, of just really driving that home, but also something that I think a lot of organizations or in the sales cycle, we fall short where we're thinking about how do we get someone to the dotted line. But I think it's a really important when you think about a closing plan is include their implementation, right? Their project timeline and go all the way through their go live, because I think just to bring it back to what Jeff kicked off of, software can be helpful, but it's only beneficial and can move the needle when it's implemented correctly, deployed, and has the adoption. So if they see that you're a partner and you truly are investing, right, it's going to go all the way down funnel to when you're trying to build pipeline through your existing base, because you're going to have a great customer experience throughout and having those check-ins throughout your customer, and they're going to feel fully surrounded. So that's just a small tweak that I think, especially in today's age, can make a really big difference when positioning yourself as an expert.
Yep. Yep. I love that. So we've talked a lot about kind of moving, talking about pipeline and top of funnel and things around kind of moving momentum in the deal or maximizing the deal size. But let's talk a little bit more. I want to dive deeper into this deal execution piece, right? And kind of those closing timelines. We talked about the close plan, which is great. I'm actually surprised when companies don't have one of, have a mutually agreed close plan and start to present that. Especially with kind of the challenges of today's economy and kind of what we're expecting for next year, it's going to be even more critical, right? That we have really tight processes. We're diving deep into deal inspection. We're really understanding all of the things that, could go wrong. You assume they go wrong and make sure that they keep on track. Are there other things that maybe, that you're doing for your teams to really tighten up that deal execution and making sure that we stay on track around those timelines?
I,
Maybe,
th- I
Jordan.
Oh, yeah, I
Yeah,
didn't
no, go ahead.
I
By
think
the
when
way,
it
Jordan, I'm glad you're starting because I'm just going to give you a little plug to the group.
oh,
I've worked with Jordan for the last year and a half, and she's one of the best sales leaders I've ever seen. So,
Awesome.
oh,
so listen close.
well, I
By the way,
appreciate
you better
that.
make this next thing good.
Yeah, no pressure on deal
Yeah.
execution. I better not mess this up.
Yeah.
But I think as organizations on the upfront, I think when it comes to deal execution, it's a couple of things that really drive home to what we had mentioned earlier. But when it comes to deal execution, it's not about forcing someone to how do we get this closed? What do we do? It's building really the rapport and expanding your relationship throughout the account, right? Whoever you talk to, you're going to have a champion. Hopefully, you're going to have some key influencers, but really expanding. I think so often as the deal starts to continue, we start speaking to 1, 2, 3 key individuals that, those are our individuals that we're working with. But again, it goes into, do you have multiple use cases? Do you have relationships? Do you have buy-in from those other departments? Do you have a relationship in some of those other departments? Are you expanding outside of that? And if you start having those, right, and even having small pieces as part of your deal execution to have some of those partners and relationships to say, hey, Jeff, would I be able to run this by you? What do you think about this? Having a prep before the demonstration so that you're not only having that mutual closing plan, but you're having that rapport and you're building those relationships from all areas within the business. So there's truly a buzz about whatever product you're selling, right? It's like, wow, have you been speaking to XYZ? They just talked to me and they got my thoughts, my opinions. And then that way you're going to be able to get to an executive. You're going to be having executive level conversations because you're selling through value, understanding business challenges, and being able to move the needle. Whereas the closing timeline isn't, again, that you're just trying to sell something transactionally, but again, you're helping benefit the business and moving their organizational goals forward for next year. So I think that's the biggest component, is just expanding throughout relationships.
Yeah, and it's all about relationships, right? I mean, we talk a lot about, humans buy from humans and it's a human interaction, but I mean, to really build that rapport and that relationship, because ideally, especially in a SaaS business, it's a long-term relationship, right? And Jordan, you mentioned about, it doesn't just end with the sale, right? It's about implementation and adoption, and for the customer to actually realize value from the product and ultimately, hopefully expand, right? And grow with you as well as renew. So that relationship is incredibly important, and multiple relationships, right? We talk about multi-threading a lot in surround sound and in companies and in sales. And for me, I mean, there's many times that I've bought from people just because of the relationship that I've had with them, right? I've chosen between two technologies equally, competitive, equally, good, but I've chosen because I actually had a great relationship with the rep and I really liked the account executive better, honestly, and went with, he felt more trustworthy to me, right? I felt rapport, we felt connected. And so certainly when he moved on to another organization, of course I took the demo call, right? Of course I took a look at his product that he was selling. So I think it's all about those relationships. Jordan, Jeff, what would you add? Aside from your plug for Jordan, which I think she definitely came through on that.
Yes, she did. So, I mean, I think that there's some basics. There's also some things that are harder to do. At the end of the day, the best you that you can be is you. And I think sometimes people fall into one of the expressions that I hate the most is "fake it till you make it," and I understand it. And
I hate that saying. I just heard that too recently.
Like, just be yourself. And I think the best you can be is your authentic self. And I think sometimes people feel like, well, oh God, Jeff was on this thing and he said, I really need to be an expert in my industry. And oh God, now I have to pretend I'm something. Like, no, just be yourself. Like, often the best relationships I've ever built are true relationships where sometimes the conversation is not even about what I'm selling and you get to know somebody. So I think being yourself is really important. Authenticity is important in the sales cycle. Jordan mentioned being multi-threaded. That is not. I'll give an example of this. We own Gong as a sales tool. It's a conversational intelligence tool, a great platform for people that really want to get a better understanding of how they're engaging with customers, what they're doing well, what they're not doing well. It's a little horrifying to listen to yourself recorded, but other than that, it's great. When I came to Conga, and it wasn't even the sales rep, it was an SDR, and the SDR had networked around to Jordan's boss here, and she introduced me to the SDR over at Gong. And then when I had an email literally every day from different departments about how excited they were and are we buying it and this would be great. And this was a person that literally put me in a corner to not be able to say no, because so many people came to me with the idea of like, hey, this would be really beneficial. Is this something that we're contemplating buying? How can we fund this? And so being multi-threaded is incredibly important. It was the first thing I bought at Conga, and I was brand new, probably because I literally couldn't say no. I would have started by pissing off everybody in the company by not buying it. So I think being multi-threaded is incredibly important. This is sales 101, but I think so often we miss it. We're so often focused on pitching our bells and whistles of whatever it is that we have to sell, that we fail to ask enough questions. And I'll give the advice I'm going to show my age on this panel, but I'll give the advice that my mother gave me a long time ago, which is the one mouth, two ears, use them proportionally. And I think it's true. Like, we have to learn to ask open-ended questions. And in so doing, becoming truly an expert in our customers' businesses, really understanding what drives them, what success criteria looks for them, what pain you're solving. And the last thing that I think Jordan sort of briefly touched on, Rosalind, I think you did too, is once we really understand that pain and start going down the path, just always go down the path of the assumptive close. Like start working on what it looks like when you own this, how you, if it's software, how you sell that software and what it looks like successfully stood up, what the KPIs are that are important to customers, what they're tracking that will ultimately lead to a successful engagement on their end. Be very cautious and cognizant, I should say, of who your business sponsor is, who's your champion, because our job is to make that champion look great in their company when we're selling them something. And I'm always aware of that. So try to make sure you know who's your champion, what's important to them, what pain you're solving. And although you're going to hand this off to professional services teams or implementation teams or customer success team, make sure that you can thread that needle of what was the pain, how did we solve it, and that gives you an opportunity to follow back up with that champion to make sure you solved their problem. By the way, you often will not have solved their entire problem, and therein lies another sales opportunity. So I think that building strong relationships by being your authentic self, by being multi-threaded in accounts, truly spending the time listening to a customer and pulling that thread through to other departments, including following up with that customer to make sure you solve their business pain, is incredibly important.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love the way you sort of tied it all together because as you were speaking, I was thinking about rules of engagement and handoffs and friction, right, for customer, kind of that frictionless process and making sure that, I'm actually surprised by how many organizations neglect to sort of pass on all of that information around why did the client actually or the customer actually buy, right? What are they trying to solve with your solution? They don't pass that on to implementation and services and customer success and sort of the downstream teams. And then they go in to meet with a customer and they ask the same questions over again and they don't know who's who. They don't know, it's a horrible, horrible customer experience and really sets a poor tone versus the opposite of that, having that much more seamless and happy customer experience. We also talked a little bit about process. I think about, from an ops perspective around deal execution and a lot of the things that, I'll share with others is just fundamentals, right? It's getting back to the basics, right? Some of the things that we're talking about are things that everybody, like you said, sales 101, Jeff, I mean, it is a lot of the stuff is like, okay, these are things that you learn very early on your career as a salesperson, but you sort of miss steps, right? I think sometimes you kind of skip over steps or you just assume that, oh, that's okay. And that's done, or, kind of check the boxes. And then it trips you up later on in the cycle, right? By not doing that. So one of the things I think, with this economy and just the market has been crazy, even the last 3 years has just been like a roller coaster for everybody, that getting back to those basics, following fundamentals and making sure that you don't skip steps is really important. Right? Go and make sure you check all of those boxes. And hey, if your pipeline is a little bit lighter than usual, you have no excuse for not going back and checking all those boxes, right? Making sure, because the last thing you want to do is be at the very end of the stage thinking you're closing that, oh, I forgot to go check in with so-and-so, or I need an extra approval, or I didn't get through security, right? Or something else with legal. The last thing you want is for that to happen.
And
awesome.
I think one piece just off of that too, I think it goes back to like even the basics of when a lot of times, right, we understand the pain, we understand the requirements, we ask the open-ended questions, but we don't revisit it, right? And sometimes it's even on, your weekly forecasting or a deal review of going not just through, medic or whatever forecasting you understand, but going back to like, what is their business requirement? And then do you know the value and the implication of that? And if we don't know the business implication, it's a great time to revisit with that executive sponsor, with that champion. And if hey, this might be a phase 2, or we're not hitting this right now, you have those pockets for future expansion and building that in so that you have those check-ins and then you have that conversation moving forward. But going back to that basics of, sometimes just going back to the very first call, what was the requirements? Because we keep going down the funnel, talking about professional services and XYZ. And it's going back to that even throughout the deal cycle of asking yourself that question, because oftentimes it might have changed, or are we driving that home throughout the process enough so that they understand it as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Awesome points. By the way, I'll just add that early on in sales cycles, particularly when some of our sales reps here at Conga and some other companies, when I was a consultant, worked with, they often focus early on price, and price is like the most important thing especially to an untenured sales rep. like, oh God, I don't think we're the lowest price. What am I going to do? Can I offer a bigger discount? And my team deals with, one of the things functions I own is deal desk, and oh God, can we give this discount? And most often when I follow up and ask questions, we aren't really aware of the business pain. We aren't really aware of what it is that we're solving for. We don't even know who we're competing with. So again, I think it's a really important thing. It's again sort of sales 101-ish, but I think it's a really important thing I don't know many industries that aren't competitive. There are very few. And if you are in a non-competitive industry, you don't need to worry about price. So you're a monopoly. That market will take whatever price you have. But if you're in a competitive industry, like most industries are, I think it's important to say, hey, look, I'm in a super competitive industry. My price will be plus or minus 5%, 10% of anybody else in the market. But I'm not in a position to understand what your use case or what it is that you need is yet. I don't know that I can even solve the problem because I don't know the problem. What I really want to try to do, I'm not obfuscating, but what I'm really trying to do is understand what problem I'm solving. And if we do a really good job in that, I promise that price is often less consequential. It's that's the immediate thing that our customers go to, because again, they're not expert buyers. It's the immediate thing they go to that seems to equate to value is price. Well, price often doesn't equate to value. I assume that if you were to look down at your feet right now, look at your shoes, they weren't necessarily the cheapest shoes you could have bought, right? Like we perceive some sort of value. Mine might be, but we perceive some value in what it is that we bought, and price isn't everything. But if I was going to go buy a pair of shoes and had never worn a pair before, I would probably start with, what does this cost? And so be careful of the price trap in these engagements. And I think it ties to Rosalind, your earlier question of how do you maximize deal cycles? You don't get engaged in price early. You have to get engaged in price late so that you truly understand and have had an opportunity to build value in a sales cycle. And truly, nothing, although most markets are competitive, most markets are often not completely commoditized. There are differentiators. And every company has their pluses and their minuses, even though they're competitive. And if you're really a good fit where your pluses exist, that's awesome. That's a great opportunity to leverage your price, and you can. And if really it's not a great fit for the deal, then yeah, you may have some price competition coming in that deal. The last thing that I'll say related to price is that I just came back from our London office, and we got a bunch of questions from our sellers there. By the way, if you guys have this, maybe say in chat if you do, about responding to RFPs. And how do I deal with RFPs, and what's the most successful way of dealing with RFPs? And I think my answer I gave this onboarding class shocked them. My answer was there's 3 types of RFPs. There's RFPs that you've worked with the customer to help create, and that's just part of their buying process. Understood. Those RFPs are fine. There's RFPs that are written by partners of yours that are often systems integrators, those types of partners that are helping your customers to develop their requirements and they're part of their buying process and RFP. Those are good. If it's the third category, which is you have no idea what this deal is or anything about the customer, and what you get as an RFP, don't respond to it, because you are not going to win that deal. And I think that particularly my European team sort of freaked out. They're like, we just don't respond to it. And I said, and somebody offered a perspective that was new to me that I thought was really valuable. One of the guys in the audience said, I agree with you. We polled the people. How many people have ever won a blind RFP ever? And Jordan, be interested in your thoughts here as a sales leader. And the answer across many, many, many years of experience in the room was one deal. And that one deal that the person had ever won came from calling the customer and saying, I see the RFP. I'm not sure that I understand the requirements. If you're willing to engage with me and help me understand the requirement. Well, in that they built rapport, he became multi-threaded, they built a business case, and actually it turned out to not be an RFP deal. So I think that answer of the one that was won from an RFP was a bit of a red herring. But I think be careful not to focus always on price. Don't commoditize yourself to drive bigger deal cycles, and be cautious of RFPs and how valuable they really are.
And I think it goes back to being comfortable, right? As sales reps, I think we always want to, or as a sales team, we have a goal in front of us. We always want to make it a fit. And if you're going to put a circle in a square peg, or it's a blind RFP, like it's okay to walk away, right? And I thought we think about it from a pipeline perspective. the time that we spend, on deals that, kick tires or are just in the researching phase, it's never going to move the needle for your plan, what's available to you. And it's hard to sometimes take off those rose-colored glasses in any deal, but be honest with yourself, because that honesty, when you look at any of your opportunities or any of your funnel, is going to allow you to build for the next one. And I think sometimes walking away, there can be two smaller things that can be much better than the one that looks really great in front of us, but isn't really great once you kind of take a deeper dive. And so I think even on the initial understanding, right? Who are you talking to in the organization? I think a lot of times we take that, sales 101, we take that initial person on the call. Oh, that are they going to be a champion? Can they be a champion, right? Have we tested that ability of them? Are they the right person? Is this a really true project, an initiative? Is this worth investing into, right? Nurture the ones that are important, and it's not necessarily, cutting them off to say, but sometimes the hardest thing, but the best thing can just be walking away from the opportunities or RFPs. So I agree with you, Jeff, in that regard. I'd be interested, Rosalind, on your impact too on that.
Yeah, no, I agree definitely on the sentiment around it's okay to walk away, right? And I think that's as salespeople, I think we tend to we want to close the deal. We're so laser focused on winning, but sometimes it's just not a good fit, or maybe it's just not the right time, right? Which actually feeds really nicely into our next topic, our next question around building, some tactics around building pipeline. And that's a perfect tip right there, Jordan, around, hey, some of those deals that weren't the right time for whatever reason, or maybe went cold, great opportunity to go back and look at some of those opportunities that are, weren't necessarily lost for good, more of a nurture. Yeah, you maybe put in a nurture campaign, and to be able to go back now and go say, okay, well, let's see if maybe the time is right now, right? Maybe it's time to resurrect that deal. Are there other things that maybe we can talk about, tactics that have really worked for both of you around building pipeline?
Yeah. I think the best way to think through pipeline is really 3 avenues, right? First, it comes down to at the beginning of the year, if you have a new territory, building out an account plan, right? Put your accounts into 3 buckets, right? You're going to have your strategic accounts, you're going to have your mid-grade accounts, and then you're going to have your accounts maybe that are likely to flourish maybe towards the end of the year. They have different initiatives that there are different quarters, and prioritize them by quarter if you can of who's mapping out where. You also often have your existing business renewals, maybe some new business initiatives, close loss, things like that. But again, for our group, because we have a little bit of a higher volume of accounts, it's focusing in on 3 tactics. One, you want to be touching your top 10, 15 strategic accounts on a weekly basis, understanding a true, genuine account plan of how are you going to prospect in, how are you going to move the needle, what's the initiatives, right? You're going to understand a large breadth and depth within a certain amount of accounts. But if you need quick pipeline, right, understanding on those account reviews, on your upcoming renewals, how can you get in front of your customers? Every opportunity you did close, how are you doing 30, 60, 90-day check-ins, right? Those are going to be your customer depth engagements. And then you're going to be doing a little bit more of your customer marketing to a larger piece of your overarching accounts, right? Making sure that they have a touch point, making sure that you're still engaging with them. And then from a net new logo perspective, focusing on, investing solutions. At Congo, we have done something like 6 Sense, where there is going to be a prioritization. It's going to know what in the market is moving the needle. And if they have a prioritization, right, understanding if they fit in that industry base, how do you target them and how do you appropriate those throughout your pipeline strategies? And I think just having a really clear plan and focusing, for my team, we run a sprint methodology, so 2 or 4 week sprints, so that we're really laser focused on key campaigns, key pipeline gen, because oftentimes we think of pipeline and we hear someone did this or someone did that, and we want to spin, but it goes down to, are we being consistent? Are we doing 8 to 12 pieces of content, right? It's like working out. If you work out once, it's not going to be a huge difference. You do it every single day, it has an impact. That's corny, but I think that's the way I always think about it.
Love that. Love that. Jeff, what would you add? Any other tips for prospecting and building out your pipeline?
Yeah, so I think Jordan hit all the right points. I would probably just add maybe a couple small things. So one is that I think to generate pipeline in most companies is a team sport. So I think often sales reps think that they have to go it alone. And I'll give you an example. Conga, our sales reps on average, this is a global statistic, generate about 40% of our pipeline. And that's a big number. but it's only 40%. It's not 100%, right? So I think it's about how well, and I think it's working well cross-functionally, or sometimes you hear playing well in the sandbox, or truly building a team approach to it. So, working with partners, working with customer success. We've got 3 outbound prospecting resources at Conga to just reach more customers. We have SDRs, we have what we call business account managers, or it's really an inside sales role, and we have sales reps, right, account managers. And what we did to try to make sure that that was incremental to our overall pipeline is we really segmented them into making sure that every single, if you look at a sales territory, we just said, hey, the sales rep is the quarterback, right? They should own prospecting into 10% of their accounts, and they're the accounts that they know. It's typically where they have an install base. It's where they have some understanding, some business relationships, et cetera. The business account managers, which is an inside sales role here, own prospecting into roughly 30% of the accounts. Could be a common, and I'm not saying whether it's new or cross-sell account is probably different by company. And then we have sales development reps, and they own prospecting in about 60% of our accounts, pure greenfield accounts. So the most accounts, but pure greenfield. What that really allowed us to accomplish was making sure that every resource we have is incremental to each other. So often in sales companies where I've consulted, they have inside sales resources, they have SDR, sometimes they have both. And by the way, I think it's one of the great things about working at Conga is the ability to work as a team to achieve goals. But in so many companies, those people are tripping over each other, where the inside sales rep or the sales development rep really becomes a bit of a concierge service to sales. And that is not truly incremental for any company. Like, hey, sales development rep, can you help me get this quote out? Can you do, those aren't, all you're doing is masking that you actually have a quoting problem in a company, as opposed to incrementally reaching more customers. And so I think it's incredibly important to think of prospecting and pipeline creation as a team sport, and making sure that you execute well as a team. I'm going to mention one other thing. I could actually probably give an hour talk on this. I actually just recently did, so I'll try to do it in a minute or less. Pipeline is not magic. Pipeline comes from setting discrete goals. And so I think when you look at creating pipeline goals, everybody would go, yeah, more pipeline's good. And I talked about the sales equation of pipeline and conversion rate and sales earlier on. Yeah, so everybody I think would agree that I need more pipeline. We did a study at my prior company of our top producing sales reps. And again, in revenue operations, I get the luxury of sitting back and being a student of people in the hard jobs of sales. And what we found is the highest producing people at this company all gave the exact same answer as to why. And the answer that they gave was that they were focused on they gave 2 different versions of the answer. They were focused on making 300% of their number. The second answer, that it was the exact same math, was that they were focused on making $1 million in sales. Okay, so they started with that baseline. So they set high goals. But what they then did was they weren't just these lofty goals of saying, I need to hit 300% of my numbers. Every single one of them broke down that number into saying, okay, great. And Jordan mentioned earlier, like some companies have 3 times pipeline targets to their sales quota. Sometimes it's 4 times. But let's just say it's 4 times, right? You had $1 million quota. Well, I have to generate $4 million worth of pipeline. If I want to hit 300% of my number, I have to hit $12 million of pipeline. And that sounds daunting, and most people give up right there. So go back to the team sport, right? So it's not just you having to go it alone. And then break that down. And if you break down your percentage of that, and if you work with an SDR or an inside sales rep or a BDR, break it down into incremental portions. And by the way, get on the same page about, by the way, we all make a lot of money if we all hit 300% of my number. This isn't about me. This is about mutual success. And if we can do that and then break that down into quarterly and monthly and weekly, and I kid you not, daily goals, pipeline goals, be able to answer this question. Did I have a good day today? As a sales rep, that's a pretty fundamental question. Did I have a good day? And ultimately, if you can create enough pipeline to meet your daily goal, you had a great day. And if you didn't, work harder the next day. And if you can do that, and that's the behavior and the way you drive towards your number, at the end of the year, what we found is not everybody hit a 300% of their number. They were on a bell-shaped distribution curve around what they were truly focused on executing. And some of the people that were focused on a 300% of their number hit 150%. Some people hit 500%.
Mm.
So if you want to make sure you hit your number, don't focus on hitting your number. Focus on
Mhm.
hitting something greater than your number. Make sure you execute the team spirit in generating your pipeline and break that down to measurable daily goals.
Yep, love that. So we just have we're actually almost at time, but we did have a couple of questions in the chat. So I want to at least get to one. Let's see if we can get to two. We have a question from Matt saying, always curious to learn from leaders like us. What types of prospecting or messaging breaks through the noise of the full inbox and busy calendars? I have my thoughts on this one, but would love to hear from
Rosalind, I
both
want to
of
hear
you.
your thoughts.
I immediately go to the value story, right? I mean, it's around what challenge are you going to solve for me? It's kind of the, what's in it for me? Why should I care, right? You have a very quick few statements to grab my attention, right? And I think, apparently my dog wants to grab my attention as well. But see, that's how she cut through the noise, right? Just get to the point. I definitely think the value prop in the business case is really where I go. Anything to add from either of you?
So I could go. I remember there's an old movie, Glengarry Glen Ross, that was ABC, always be closing. I think it's ABT, always be testing. Test your message, make sure it resonates, right? Be able to say what you do concisely and to deliver a value proposition, and keep testing that and seeing what's working to try to break through to the noise. So always be testing your messages and make sure that you're delivering something that is concise and compelling. And by the way, it's okay. It's not what you have to sell is not always a fit for everybody, nor do they always have time to pay attention to it. Move on. It's part of the thick skin that we grow being in sales. And make sure you hit them multiple times so it's not just that they were busy that day, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So I had mentioned earlier that we have used SalesLoft and currently use Outreach as a cadence tool. I think that's often how you break through, is making sure that you're having multiple touches. But multiple touches of things that are relevant to them is particularly important. So always be testing and make sure that your message is resonating. And if it's not, change it and see what's working in whatever industry you're in.
Yeah. And I think last piece of that is just make it research based, right? If it's a top tier account, you should have account plans. Look at their job postings. What kind of roles are they hiring for? What business challenges are they trying to solve in those job requirements, right? Those small details will take you away from 99% of people that are prospecting in. Understand, read, engage in your accounts, because oftentimes you're going to see a lot more kind of underlying, and then you're going to pinpoint an exact problem that's going to hit the value that they're solving for. And they're going to answer the phone or they're going to respond to your email.
Yeah, I love that. So we did have a couple more questions. So I'm going to turn this back to Savannah, but I think maybe we can get some of these questions in a follow-up.
Yep, for sure. And I would encourage to maybe start a discussion thread in Sales Hacker. That way it lives on forever. But thank you all. Thank you, Rosalind, for hosting today's conversation and Conga for sponsoring. Jeff and Jordan, your insight was incredible as well. As we wrap up, we will include some resources that Conga has shared with us in a post, our email with the recording that'll be sent shortly after this. So be sure to check those out. We do have another webinar coming up on Thursday, so check that out as well. I would love to have you at another one. And I really hope that you all have a great evening or day wherever you are in the world. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you all again for tuning in and for sharing your insight here with us today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.